Senators, when the House last rose, the Public Finance Management Act resolution to Parliament to borrow for capital and current expenditure to support the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States Skills and Innovation Project was in debate. Senator Polius.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, on Thursday this week, we celebrate or we observe our anniversary of independence. And I just want to wish everyone in this honorable house and all St. Lucians a happy independence anniversary. Madam President, I rise in this House as one of the voices of the opposition. And as I have said time and again, that we are duty-bound to scrutinize the decisions and the policies put forward by this government. Madam President, today we are here to lend support to a resolution to authorize the Minister for Finance to borrow a total of $11,500,000 US from the International Development Association in order to finance the implementation of the OECS Skills and Innovation Project. While I appreciate the intentions of this resolution and to register my support, Madam President, I want to raise some concerns and call upon this government to address them in order to facilitate the successful implementation of this OECS Skills and Innovation Project. Madam President, we are very much aware that education is the cornerstone of societal progress. It is the institution that shapes the minds of future generations and lays the foundation for a prosperous future. We all know that. However, achieving excellence in education, Madam President, requires a concerted effort. A concerted effort from multiple stakeholders, including agencies like the OECS, UNESCO, non-profit organizations, Madam President, community-based groups, schools, families, churches, sports clubs, even uniform groups. The aim is to help our young people to develop to their fullest potential and to be able to acquire skills, important life skills that they can use in order to be able to navigate the complexities of an evolving society. Madam President, this Skills and Innovation Project is a commendable initiative, and it is aimed at, as the leader of government business mentioned, three main components, Madam President. But I only want to focus on just one of those components, which is post-secondary students. And these students are going to be equipped with a range of transversal skills. And what do we mean by that? Skills that they really need in order to succeed in today's society. So the leader of government business didn't really mention, although he highlighted maybe just two of those: creative thinking, problem solving, but I think that was done en passant. So I want, Madam President, if you permit me, to go down and to examine some of those skills that our post-secondary school students will be equipped with in order to be able to benefit significantly from this project. But first, I want to define what we mean by transversal skills. And so UNESCO 2014 defines transversal skills as skills that are typically considered as not specifically related to a particular job, task, academic discipline, or area of knowledge. And that can be used in a wide range of situations and work settings. In other words, Madam President, these skills, often referred to as soft skills or transferable skills, they cut across different tasks. They cut across different jobs and, of course, roles, even career paths. We know that these skills can be transferred. But what are those skills we're talking about? The leader of the leader of government business mentioned critical thinking. It is true. Many of our students at secondary school, even at the post-secondary school, at the South Louis Community College, many of them lack some of those skills that they need in order to be able to function effectively in the workplace. And even to make the necessary adaptations required to ensure that they benefit from a meaningful learning experience that is in the classroom. So communication. This project aims to help the students develop excellent communication skills. Many times they have difficulty articulating their ideas, getting their points across. The ability to work collaboratively with teams, respecting the views of others. Many of the students do not even know how to agree to disagree without a fight, without getting into conflict. So conflict management, conflict resolution skills will be taught to those students so that they know exactly how to behave, not just in the school, but in their future workplaces. We cannot overemphasize the need to equip our students with the digital skills that they need in order to be able to function in this digital landscape. Problem-solving skills, emotional intelligence, Madam President. And you know what? It's not just the students who need emotional intelligence, you know. Many of our leaders lack emotional intelligence. Madam President, and when I say leaders, I'm not just referring to those here. So some of you were saying, oh, because you were thinking of just political leaders. A lot of our leaders do not know how to manage their emotions. They don't know how to empathize and respect the perspectives of others. So we expect our students to gain those skills. Skills that we believe will help them to make positive changes in their lives and in their communities. So, Madam President, these skills are quintessential to these students. These skills will help them adapt to changes in their schools, their communities, organizations that they are part of, and to help them live more meaningful, productive lives. So it is against this background, Madam President, that I lend my support and give a thumbs up to this resolution. However, while we recognize the importance of investing in education and innovation, Madam President, we cannot ignore the glaring failures of this government to address critical issues within our health and education sector. Issues, Madam President, that I strongly believe that if not dealt with urgently, will pose a major threat to the implementation of the OECS Skills and Innovation Project. And of course, it will negatively affect the desired quality outcomes of this project. Madam President, it is undeniable that the safety and security of our schools should be paramount. And we have heard this time and again from the Minister for Education. Yet, we find ourselves in a situation where some schools, and Madam President, may I add that while the focus might be on post-secondary education, we must take cognizance of the fact that the students at the upper secondary school might very well be the participants in this project, depending on when this project is rolled off, depending on when the project is implemented. So we cannot take any myopic view and think that we only focus on post-secondary in Viewfort and the South Louis Community College. The students are coming in from the secondary schools, and we need to be able to nip it in the bud. We need to be able to do this. Teachers and students alike are living in fear. And even parents, many of them are worried. They are worried about the safety of their children every time, the children go off to school. Tell me, Madam President, tell me, how can we expect our students to thrive in an environment where the basic safety is not guaranteed? And did we hear anything from the minister or even the leader of government business regarding the environment that must exist to facilitate the effective implementation of this project within schools? Or the very same post-secondary schools? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. This government's reactive approach, Madam President, in addressing school security and youth violence undermines any efforts to implement ambitious programs such as the OECS Skills and Innovation Project. So while these skills, or the acquisition of those skills, are valuable, it would be so naive of any agency, and all those in education would know that very well, so naive of any agency or government to assume that such a program can succeed in an environment where schools are not secure and teachers do not feel safe. A safe and conducive learning environment is an imperative for the success of such a program and any other program. Madam President, the money can be secured. It can be procured. But if the very same students, the direct beneficiaries of this project, are not receptive, they're not in a frame of mind because they constantly have to look over their shoulders. And to top it all, Madam President, they are required to work and learn in an environment where fear pervades the school walls. As promising and commendable as the project may seem, it will be counterproductive. And don't try to tell me that the situation that I have described is far-fetched or is far from reality. We all know it. And if the members opposite hold this view, then they are really oblivious of what's taking place in our secondary schools, as well as the various communities in which these students live, these children live, our young people live, where youth violence is concerned. Madam President, I think it is time for us to wake up. Wake up and focus on those things that will help in a more holistic way help our students and the young people of this country succeed. Moving on, Madam President. The challenges posed by inadequate school security can hinder both students and teachers to focus on learning and innovation. How can we expect the teachers, those who are going to impart the knowledge, how do we expect them to effectively do that? Equip the students with those soft skills and foster creativity, innovative thinking, when they are constantly preoccupied with concerns about their own safety? How can we expect the teachers, perhaps not so much at the post-secondary school level, but at the secondary school, some of those very same teachers are fearful themselves, some of whom have been assaulted by students, and in a few cases, the parents of the very same children they teach. So how do we expect them to intervene when sometimes students bring in weapons? How do we expect them to, Madam President? Please tell me. And I hope that the leader of government business would shed some light on this. How? Madam President, another critical area that must be addressed to ensure the effective implementation of the skills and innovation project is the health sector. And you might be wondering how. What's the relationship? First of all, Madam President, in order for this project to take effect, both teachers and students need to participate in the learning experience. If they are dealing with health issues due to inadequate health facilities, they may have difficulty attending classes regularly, or they may have difficulty participating in the project activities. Illness can lead to absenteeism, Madam President, and which can in turn compromise the quality of instruction delivered to students. And we're talking about the ability to acquire the soft skills being taught. That is going to be questioned as well. And just to illustrate, Madam President, only last semester, one of my students missed a few classes at the Sir Arthur Lewis Community College. So, yes, just wanted to correct you, leader of government business. I used to, but I'm still there. One of my students missed a few classes. Why? Because she had to accompany her mom to Martinique to receive medical care, medical treatment. Do you think that there should have been, or there would have been any need for that student to miss classes if only the parents could have accessed those very same healthcare services in this country? There would be no need. Absolutely no need. Just imagine this very same student who's a participant of this program, having missed some classes, some sessions, some workshops, whatever the activities may be, there would be lots of gaps. And so these students would have difficulty meeting the requirements, or these students would also have difficulty developing those very same soft skills that the program seeks to deliver. So, Madam President, we have to look at the whole picture, you know, the entire picture. Secondly, Madam President, persistent health issues can lead to increased dropout among our students. We have not thought about that, especially if they feel unable to keep up with their studies due to poor health facilities. This can ultimately undermine the effectiveness of the Skills and Innovation Project in achieving its goals. And finally, Madam President, if students are unable to fully engage in the project due to health-related challenges, they may not develop the necessary skills and competencies needed to succeed in today's dynamic environment. Of course, we know that this would have long-term consequences for their future prospects and opportunities. So, when I listened to the Prime Minister sometime, was it last week or week before, he announced his intention to deliver to the Marshall Combined School a state-of-the-art kitchen. Now, don't misconstrue what I'm saying. Not that the school does not need a well-equipped kitchen. Every school, every single school on the island deserves a kitchen that is well-equipped as part of the school feeding program. But he doesn't see the need to deliver to the teachers, the students of the post-secondary school in Vieux-Fort, and the people of St. Lucia by extension, a state-of-the-art hospital, a facility that would very well provide the quality healthcare services to adequately meet the health needs of potentially sick students and teachers, to reduce the absenteeism rate, and to ensure the success and effectiveness of the OECS Skills and Innovation Project. I'm saying this again, so perhaps you didn't see the big picture, or the bigger picture. If this government had connected the dots, they would have seen that having a top quality, world-class, now they recognize, they may call it the box, but now they recognize.
Senator, I must bring you back on track. You have gone, I've given you leeway the first time and you're repeating, so I urge you please to stick to the motion that we are debating. Thank you.
I'm so guided, Madam President. So I will continue. So, Madam President, as I conclude, let me reiterate that we recognize the importance of investing in skills and innovation. However, we cannot turn a blind eye to the government's tardiness in addressing some pressing issues we face in this country. We urge this government to take decisive action. Decisive action to ensure the safety and well-being of our students and educators. Only then can we ensure that an initiative such as the OECS Skills and Innovation Project and other similar interventions aimed at enhancing the educational experience of our students and to prepare them more adequately for the workplace have a fighting chance at success. I thank you, Madam President.
Senator Fede.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I want to beg you leave to sympathize with the fishermen of ancillary and canneries villages that have succumbed significant losses in the recent turbulent tides that we had about 10 days ago. Significant loss of damage to their property, their fishing vessels, engines and boats, which ravished our west coast. And I also want to extend the same sympathy to fishermen elsewhere in our country. Madam President, I rise today to offer a few comments on the OECS Skills and Innovation Project. And as I listen to the leader of government business present the bill, and as I prepare for today's debate, I found some very startling revelations, which I would like to share with the House today. Madam President, today we borrow a total of $152 million across two pieces of legislation. This project by itself, Madam President, is $11.5 million. Might I add, Madam President, that there's no amount of money that will be too much to train up our young people, train the skills of the workers of this country, and to ensure that we give the people of St. Lucia the very best fighting chance to compete and to realize their dreams and aspirations. No amount of money. I will support anything that goes towards the advancement. But Madam President, I am often alarmed by how shameless the opposition comes to the House and ask for these mammoth sums. 152 million today. The government, sorry. The government. Madam President, you know that the opposition does not have the power to come and borrow. The Minister of Finance, which is the constitutional office that borrows money, resides with the government. But Madam President, whenever I see these large sums of money, I must remind my friends on the opposite side that their ads leading up to the campaign of the last general elections were reckless. And they shamelessly misled the people of St. Lucia to believe that there was this problem with borrowing. Now, Madam President, the world knows I'm not very good at Creole, but I'll attempt, Madam President, their slogan. They said, Madam President, I think the slogan was Madi Prete.
That's right.
And so, Madam President, what happened to Madi Prete? 152 million? Now, Madam President, this has actually triggered me to go and look at all of the borrowings for the year. And I'm not going to go into it now. I shall leave that for the subsequent bill. And I know that my colleagues on this side may have done the same level of meticulous analysis as well. But, Madam President, I point this out to say that we are a small country. And no amount of politics or political narrative from the St. Lucia Labour Party will change the fact that we will need to borrow to finance very important initiatives such as the one that we're presiding over today. No amount of rhetoric will change that reality, because we're a small country with constraints. And so, not because we're in opposition, we will adopt the Madi Praetate theme. We will not do that, Madam President. We will understand, but we will also remind the opposition that when the people reject you in the upcoming election, that you too must be responsible in how you speak about the financing of this country. It's a serious matter.
Yep.
Now, Madam President, this piece of legislation comes at a time when private sector dialogue has placed particular significance on the need to upskill our human capital. You speak to business people, and the leader of government business is quite right, that the gap between what is required in the job market, in workplaces, and what is taught in our schools, there is a big mismatch. And so there has been an incessant plea by private sector companies towards governments after governments for there to be an upskilling and there to be greater consultation between governments and the private sector as it pertains to the quality of training, the types of training, the types of subject areas that we train up our young people in. Madam President, I'm not an expert in everything, but I will venture to go into a sector that I know very well. And I remember when I wore a different hat in the tourism sector, it's quite difficult for us to find chefs in particular, food and beverage experts in particular. And so what many hotels were forced to do was to import that talent. That's quite some years ago, Madam President. You can tell by the recession of hair on my head how long that was. But we've gotten a lot better, for example, at how we provide the skills for the hospitality sector. So much so that I'm happy to report that out of those dialogues, we have seen a significant number of local executive chefs, meaning someone who will be an individual who runs the entire network of restaurants within a hotel facility. Sometimes, Madam President, there are up to 10, 12 restaurants that needs to be managed by an executive chef, and that requires a particular level of skill. And so I'm very happy that we see that advancement in that area. Certain engineers as well have been one of those areas that I know that the tourism sector have found extremely difficult to find, and they have had to import that talent. We see an increase and we see a bridging of the gap in that area as well, Madam President. Madam President, I stood here though and I wonder, how did the Universal Secondary School Education project implemented by the St. Lucia Labour Party, how did that actually work? What are the results after a couple decades of the SLP's institution of the universal secondary schools in the country? So I remember one of them being the Marigot Secondary School, the Denrivé Secondary School, which Senator Polius would know very well in the Valley area, the Grosley Secondary School, and I think PI was another one of those secondary schools. And it is important to give account, because you're coming to borrow more money. And I think that as you borrow more money, it's important to reflect on what have your previous engagements in education, how has that worked for the St. Lucia Labour Party administration? What have we gotten from the universal education schools as a country? Madam President, my own information tells me that while we were instituting those secondary schools, that we flagrantly overbuilt schools, and there came a time when the secondary schools were being built at a faster pace of the birth rate of St. Lucia. The two were going in a different direction. And so we ended up with a lot of empty classrooms as a result. But I would like to know, what are the academic achievements, if any at all? My investigations also reveal, I know that in this house we've got the parliamentary secretary in the Ministry of Education, that the government is planning on transforming a lot of those secondary schools that I've cited into now technical vocational schools. So the question must be asked whether the 4 technical vocational schools that the government is about to transition from the failed universal secondary education project, whether those secondary schools are an admission of the Labour Party's failure that your universal secondary education project hasn't quite worked. Because what it did basically, whether you pass your common entrance or it's now called what is it called, Educator? Caribbean? CPEA exam. They just allowed people to leave primary school having shown no proclivity for academic prowess, and we now allow them to go into secondary schools. So I have that question, and I will be quite intrigued to hear the answer from the parliamentary secretary in the Ministry of Education, who's been in the business for quite some time. Madam President, so the skills jobs mismatch, it's been a chronic problem. In fact, many planners, Madam President, have actually cited this as a big contributor to the high unemployment problem that we persistently face as a country. The leader of government business cited the high levels of youth unemployment rate, and I was quite intrigued by that. And also mentioned as well the reduction in the unemployment rate, even though the Central Statistics Department warned in the Economic and Social Review that no one could compare the previous years to this year's unemployment rate for the mere fact that the methodology has changed. But Madam President, I'll allow the leader of government business to have a bit of leeway. But Madam President, the leader of government business said something interesting. He said the public service cannot absorb the thousands of young people graduating from Sir Arthur Lewis Community College. And I found it was very interesting, because I was waiting, Madam President, to hear him say in the next sentence that as a result of that, my government had a robust economic plan to fast-track jobs in the private sector. And so I'm a little disappointed that the leader of government business identified the problem, but did not, Madam President, give any solution in terms of the policy steps that his administration would have instituted to propel the private sector so that they can invest more, so that they can create more jobs, and so that they can drive this economy. But I want to remind the leader of the opposition, Madam President, the leader of government business, Madam President, through you, that it is the government's role to ensure that policies like tourism and construction propel this economy so that we can create jobs for the young people, for the not so young, and every demographic of this country, Madam President. But instead, what do we see, Madam President? We see the stopping of various projects, which the government needs to ensure that many construction workers can find jobs. We see that the tourism industry is not fully back to where it ought to have been to pre-COVID levels. So the tourism and construction industry, which has been propelling the economy for quite some time, Madam President, both sectors are not firing on their maximum. We see that they have slowed down significantly, even though the government continues to tell the country that the tourism industry is growing. But Madam President, that is growing from a very low position, because Madam President, if you are in a hole and you want to get back to zero, it takes some time. You can climb a few steps up. It doesn't mean that you have reached back to where you were. And so there is still a significant way to go, unfortunately, in some of the key economic drivers in this country, so that we can propel jobs for the young people and for all demographics in this country. Madam President, a lot of emphasis was placed as well on the importance of information technology. And I agree with the leader of government business, because, and I felt like finally we will agree on something. But again, I was disappointed because, again, an opportunity was identified. But I was waiting in the next sentence to hear that the government's policies were going to be more than just giving students laptops, so that we can finally construct a robust information technology economy. Madam President, big opportunity was missed. But all I heard were the number of laptops that we give. Yep. And I want to say to the leader of government business that if our economy is going to be repositioned into making sure that we can be a major participant in the digital economy, which I've seen has transitioned many agrarian economies. Taiwan, for example, comes to mind, Mr. President, and the great work that they have done to transition their economy from being an agricultural economy into an information technology-based economy. Madam President, I'm very impressed with what's happening in Costa Rica, as they have transitioned themselves as well from being an agricultural-based economy 25 years ago into now training up their society, retraining their workforce, so that their workforce can take advantage of all of the opportunities globally for cybersecurity experts, for coding experts, for people in artificial intelligence. I was very disappointed that the leader of government business did not give me any detail whatsoever as it relates to how we can use the passion, the innovativeness. This is a bill about innovation, by the way, as well, Madam President. To use and harness that enthusiasm, that passion, that excitement that our young people often display as it relates to the digital economy, and how that has fascinated and taken hold of our young people in a way that it has not done in any other generation in St. Lucia before. So those were some opportunities that I thought that the government would have missed in terms of explaining this bill, explaining how information technology could advance our economic prospects in the country, to create small businesses, create jobs, especially within the youth sector. Madam President, I remember, and what this debate has now provoked, is my memory as it relates to the fiscal incentives. Traditionally, Madam President, fiscal incentives focused on manufacturing machinery and equipping manufacturing plants. And I remember that the former Minister of Commerce and Business and Investment, Honorable Bradley Felix, who's a member of the lower house, had the foresight to come to the House and to change the whole scope of what fiscal incentives would look like. And he envisioned, Madam President, that the information technology sector would have played a significant role in the future economic development of St. Lucia. And he expanded the Fiscal Incentive Act to then allow small business people within the information technology sector to also benefit from concessions or incentives or whatever you want to call it, those tax breaks that tourism and manufacturing companies would have benefited from. Madam President, he went further and he established a $10 million facility for the Small Enterprise Development Unit, where people who wanted to invest in the information technology sector, that they too can benefit from the loans available, concessionary rates that were available for them to set up their own businesses. And I thought that the leader of government business was going to tell us today that his government was going to expand on that and do better than 10 million a year. So, Madam President, believe you me when I tell you that I am disappointed, because here is a great opportunity that the government is missing on this initiative. Madam President, the former administration of the United Workers' Party was excoriated by the leader of government business rather passionately for not being able to reach an agreement with the UWI for a fourth campus in St. Lucia. Now, we're approaching the dawn of the third year of this administration, and the SLP administration had spoken about this. In fact, they said in their manifesto, and they continue to say in the House, that they are committed to having every child to get a university degree. I'm saying that with that in mind, and with their own strong feelings about the University of the West Indies campus being on St. Lucia, that before the next general elections, I want to see you have the fifth campus for UE in St. Lucia. I want to make sure that this happens. And I'm telling you that if you do it, we will place our vote for the Labour Party. But Madam President, I know that I will not have to vote for the Labour Party, because what this is about politics. This is about identifying where someone has failed, where you yourself is not willing to do anything about the problem or the problems that you have identified. So I would say to the Labour Party government, Madam President, that if they are not serious about university campus on St. Lucia, please stop misleading the people of St. Lucia. Now, there are people in this room, Madam President, because the leader of government business went further to tell us rather proudly, and I'm proud of him, that he's a graduate of the University of the West Indies. And that's really, really good. We have a lot of graduates that have graduated from the University of the West Indies as well. But there are people in this room, and not in the opposition, that have sent their kids away to the United States to study. There's nothing wrong with that, right? So to somehow, Madam President, use this thing that we're proud of Caribbean institutions, and to imply as though the opposition is not proud of Caribbean institutions. The government needs to stop this, Madam President. That really has no place in the debate, because this is a serious debate about the future of our young people in this country. And so whether our young people choose to go to Oxford or Yale or Harvard or MIT, wherever they want to go, Madam President, they should always be left with that choice, because let's be frank, there is no university on the planet, including the University of the West Indies, that can offer every subject area that our children aspire to do. I mean, I watch in amazement the number of St. Lucian athletes who are overseas, who've gotten athletic scholarships to go to study and to really carry out their dreams to become athletes. And so if that opportunity is not at the University of the West Indies, I don't expect the young people of this country to turn it down. Because if you're getting an opportunity to go wherever you want, then allow our young people, they should not be judged by which institution they choose to go. So when you're going to now come to the Honorable House and you want to judge people for not going to UE, that really is disingenuous. And
Senator Fede, I am a little lost as to your argument right now. I really did not recall the Honorable Leader of Government Business making that pronouncement, but I want to guide you and tell you to stick to the motion that we're debating now. He identified the 4 areas, and maybe you could speak to that, but I mean, I'm trying to follow you there, and you've lost me for a bit. So I want to kind of caution you and bring you back to the motion which is before the House, yes?
Thank you, Madam President, but I also have to refer to things that have been said so far during the debate on the motion, and I want to respectfully, Madam President, submit that the Leader of Government Business did say that he's a proud graduate of the University of the West.
However, he did not infer that people who chose to go to other schools should be battered and all of that. He never inferred that. He only indicated that he was a proud product of the University of the West Indies, etc. But you have gone on the tangent like he inferred other things. So I'm saying, no, he didn't. So please stick to whatever he said and speak to the motion before us. That is my guidance.
Very well, Madam President. I thank you very much for your kind guidance. But, Madam President, so for me, I see a learning institution as a global choice that our students have. And I think that it is my view, which I humbly submit to this House, that regardless of which institution you want to go to, it could be one of the universities based right here in St. Lucia. We have a lot of medical schools that are here. And if you want to pursue your academics in the medical field, then you can pursue that locally if it is your choice. There's so many factors that will influence the decision that people are going to make. Availability of spaces, availability of courses with what the individual would want to do in addition to affordability of the budget. It was also mentioned here today about the $22 million. The monies owed by the previous administration, monies owed by the government to UE. I want to say to the Leader of Government Business that the monies owed to UE didn't just start from 2016 to 2021.
That's right. That's right.
That again is misleading to submit.
Yes.
And so, Madam President, this money accumulated over time. And if you look back at the records, Madam President, you would see that this goes all the way back to even some of the bills back to the early 1990s, as far back as that. And so, Madam President, institutions, governments, the government of St. Lucia, regardless of administration, has had particular challenges meeting their financial requirements to several institutions. I remember when I was in the press, clearly, when the Secretary General of the OECS then was a gentleman from Dominica called Swinburne Lestrade, and he had gone on the media and asked member countries of the OECS to meet their financial obligations to the OECS Secretariat. And that is a problem. I mean, the SLP administration was in government then, but to say that it was all of the membership dues that the then SLP administration accrued would be disingenuous on my part, as it is disingenuous on the part of the Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I rise on a point of order.
Your point of order, Senator.
The leader of opposition business is misleading the House gravely. I didn't stand earlier because I realized you interrupted, but now he's going on a tangent to suggest that we're suggesting or we're saying that the government did not honor its commitment and the bill accumulated was because of their government. I have never said that. That was not uttered in this House. My clear argument was that the last administration did not pay towards the University of the West Indies. He's now bringing something with OECS, talking about who accumulated the debt. I did not talk about that. I don't know how that argument can be relevant to this debate. So, Madam President, I think you should be so guided.
Thank you, Senator. Leader of Government Business. Senator Fede, again, like I indicated, the Senator did list the 4 areas, and he did mention debt to the regional institutions, including UE, and please be guided. Please avoid making statements that the Leader of Government Business did not make. I'm guiding you again. Please proceed.
Oh, I want to thank you for your guidance, Madam President, and I want to thank the Leader of Government Business for the clarity. I'm very happy that he didn't suggest that the millions owed to the University of the West Indies was a fault of the 2016 to 2021 administration led by Alan Shastney. I think that that's quite important for the record, Madam President. So I want to thank the Leader of Government Business very, very generously for his intervention. Thank you. So, Madam President, if you would allow me to just say, notwithstanding, and this has nothing to do with what the Leader of Government Business says, $11.5 million, which we're about to borrow here today, is a drop in the bucket of all the things that we need to do in education. The Social Economic Review, I think the last time I gazed at the amount that is being spent for education, it's over 200 million. And it's one of the biggest budget areas. And so both political parties, whenever they have been at the helm of government, have done their best for the education of this country. However, I'll say there are contrasts in terms of how we may institute a particular policy, how we may manage it, and the results that may come out of that. Madam President, I'll say to you that notwithstanding all of this money which we spend in the education sector, that the fiscal constraints, regardless of who is in government, I know the SLP would like to make us believe that they are
Beg your pardon, Senator Fede. Sorry to interrupt. You have 10 minutes to complete your presentation.
Thank you. Thank you very much, ma'am. The St. Lucia Labour Party administration would like us to believe that they are genius at managing the fiscal situation which grips our country. In fact, I would like to say, Madam President, that that's contrary to the facts. Contrary to the facts. And this impedes the ability of respective administrations to invest adequately into the education sector. We just don't spend enough money in those areas. And so when we look at, for example, the aging school plant, what is needed, the investments that are required in our school plants, for example, we see that $11.5 million is nothing. It's really a drop in the bucket. So regional governments have had issues in paying their bills to regional institutions. So this is not something that escapes the country because the St. Lucia Labour Party administration is in power or escapes the country because the UWP government is in power. This is a reality of governing a small country with a very narrow tax base and with very, very limited opportunities for economic growth prospects. And so, Madam President, I want to say to you that it is with mixed feelings that I comment on this bill today. I am largely disappointed in the government's approach to education. My colleague did point out rather eloquently the issue of crime creeping into our schools and the need for there to be increased school security, and there need to be more innovativeness applied to the management of the education system, and the need to be straightforwardness and more decisive action taken for a speedy and effective implementation of various projects across the skills and education sector. Madam President, I submit this to the House. Thank you very much.
Senator Prosper.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, before I make my contribution, please allow me leave to join the leader of government business in offering sympathies to the late Lytton Thomas, who was a former educator, former principal of the Sir Arthur Lewis Community College. Allow me to offer sympathies to his family. I did attend the funeral. I was happy that I was there. I also wish to express sympathies to the family of Chairman Emeritus Tom Walcott, who passed away as well, and to our colleagues, Miss Senator Toussaint and Senator Ferdinand, on the passing of a relative. I also wish to extend happy independence wishes to all St. Lucians on the observance of our 45th independence anniversary this Thursday. Madam President, I stand here today in support of the Public Finance Management Act resolution of Parliament to borrow for capital and current expenditure to support the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, OECS, Skills and Innovation Project. Madam President, I thought this was a straightforward instrument and we would all stand in solidarity. However, this is not the case this morning. Madam President, we must appreciate the power of collaboration. And as OECS countries, we face similar issues. And this is why we have decided to collaborate so that we could face those issues together. Similar issues with the youth in our territory, unemployment, crime, because we notice, Madam President, that there is a gap. And we have to work together in order to close this gap as much as we can. And therefore, we borrow for youth training. We borrow for our youth. We borrow to assist our youth to develop. We borrow just as we have been trying, the Senator spoke about TVET institutions. We realize, as Senator Gibeon said earlier, that our students leave school with academics and not with the skills that the workplace demands. And therefore, we are trying to fill this gap. So this is an addition to what we are attempting to do with the technical vocational institutions. Madam President, the project, I wish all of us would read through the document and realize that the project caters for disadvantaged, vulnerable individuals and groups. And these include single mothers, youth with disabilities, youth who need access to technology, abused and exploited youth. So it's not just one set of students. And this is post-secondary. We need to focus and realize that the program is for post-secondary students, students who have left secondary school, not simply students who go to post-sec or whatever. It is for all youth who have left secondary school. Not immediately, but we have youth in the community who have left post-secondary. Madam President, Senator Polius has painted a picture of doom and gloom regarding safety in our schools. That teachers are afraid. I was wondering whether I was in St. Lucia when I listened to the senator. We have issues in our education system, Madam President. We have instability in some of our schools. But I don't think we should generalize and paint a picture that teachers in St. Lucia are generally feeling unsafe at their schools. Madam President, we are addressing the issues. We are visiting the schools where there are issues. We are working with the teachers. We are putting additional security measures in place at the schools where there is instability. So I don't want anyone to believe that a few schools, and I'm going to reiterate, it's a few schools, and I have visited the schools, so I know the schools, Madam President. The old Chinese African proverb says it takes a village to train a child. We cannot continue to raise fingers. The proverb means that we should work together to provide a safe and healthy environment for our children to thrive. And so it has to be a collaborative effort. We have to bring the family back into focus. We have to work with our families, with our teachers, and it has to be all of us, yes. And we are working on community-based groups. We are putting the cadet corps together. We are working with the scouts and the guides together.
That's true.
The government is doing this presently. We have put money in the budget so that we can bring community groups back together, because we recognize the issues in the society, and we are working steadfastly to see how we can bring our youth back together. So it's not a case where we are sitting and we are doing nothing, Madam President. Madam President, the senator spoke about borrowing. I am certain that he agrees that we are borrowing for a good cause. The borrowing is not senseless borrowing. And so when we are borrowing for a good cause, because you on this side, you are saying that there is an issue, there's a problem. We have to address the problem. And therefore, if borrowing is what we have to do to address the problem, we are doing just that. Madam President, we also spoke about assessment and CPA. Honorable Fede Senator Fede spoke about assessment. We must assess, we do assess the students. This is why we introduced the CPA assessment, because it's a more authentic assessment. It is not a one-shot assessment that we use to send our children to secondary schools. The literacies are assessed. It's an assessment of the literacies at the primary schools. So children get the skills that they require to focus, to learn, to achieve when they reach secondary schools. Madam President, we spoke of laptops, and this is not the first time we are speaking about this issue in the Senate. We are not just giving laptops. Our educators have developed content for these laptops. Content which is culturally relevant, content which is in harmony with the curriculum, content which is reader-friendly, content which is correct and meet the needs of the students of St. Lucia. And so it's not just an e-book, because I don't want to go back there, because the content on the e-book wasn't culturally relevant. The teachers were not using it. The children were not using it.
Less money for the license.
And we were paying thousands, in the millions, for the licenses. And those e-books were substandard. And I have said it before, that we had, the last time when we noticed that the people from IT were coming down with boxes, the minister had to intervene because they were going to dump. And we didn't want it to be a political issue. So we had to stop the process. So we no longer have to pay the millions in license fees. Instead, the 2-point-something million, we use it to buy laptops for the children every year. And so each of them have a device which is of good quality. And we don't have to pay over $100 US per year for each child for licenses. So we are on the right track, Madam President. We speak of the UE and the campus that was proposed for St. Lucia, that the former government didn't see any value in putting this complex here. It's a missed opportunity, Madam President. And the senator is asking that we put he knows very well that it's a missed opportunity, that Grenada took the opportunity and made good of it. And therefore, we do not have the opportunity to have the fourth campus. In Antigua. The former government also did not pay a cent of its obligation to UWI. Not a cent of its obligation to UWI. So when we came, they had not paid anything over the 5 years.
5 years, yeah.
Wow.
Okay? And this is why the amount has accumulated to 22 million. The government has made one payment last year. We are making another payment this year. Okay? We are making another payment this year. So at least it shows the willingness to pay. Those people who have a legal mind will tell you it shows a willingness to pay. You may not be able to pay all, but we are paying. But the point remains that the former government did not pay a cent. And so our students from UE, our students who want to study at UE are disadvantaged because UE doesn't want to take in more students because we are owing so much. $22 million is a lot of money.
And we know that.
He knows that. Madam President, I don't think I want to say much more, but the opposition knows very well that the government has invested a lot in education in St. Lucia. We assist not only with laptops, We are paying CXC fees in math and English, and as long as the economy does a lot better, we are going to absorb some of the other subjects for CXC. When school reopens, all parents know that we give educational assistance to the children. We help to pay bus, and I don't even want to boast about the number of scholarships that we have been able to acquire for the students, for the young people of St. Lucia. So there is nothing to argue about. If we want to play politics, we can play politics. But I think the government is in the right direction with education, and anywhere we see the gaps, we are going to assist the young people of St. Lucia. Thank you very much.
Senator Toussaint Challery.
Thank you, Madam President. As I rise to make what I hope is a very short intervention on the motion before us, Madam President, I beg leave of you to, first of all, thank my Senate colleagues for the words of sympathy, and in the same breath to extend the same to Senator Ferdinand. Indeed, it is an emotional day for me, having lost my great-grandmother this morning, but I am comforted in knowing that she lived a long life. She died this morning at the age of 103, and so I'm comforted by that. I want to as well take the opportunity to extend sympathy greetings to the country as a whole and the family of both Sir Lytton Thomas as well as Brother Tom Walcott. I want to take this opportunity as well to congratulate, like Senator Leader of Government Business indicated, amidst the sadness, there is indeed so much to be thankful for. And so I want to take this opportunity to congratulate all those who were nominated and those who received awards at the recently held Sports Awards ceremony. I want to also lastly congratulate the Beaufort North Raiders cricket team who advanced to the semi-final rounds of the Prime Minister's Independence T20 Cup this weekend. And so, Madam, as I move into the motion before us, I want to begin by saying that, providing that I have time and time again in this House spoken of my education journey, Madam President, I want to say that I rise in support of a motion that I understand very, very well will bring some much needed support, some much needed relief in the education sector, and in some cases to the persons who need it the most, those who are vulnerable and those who otherwise may not have been able to access education beyond secondary school education in this country, Madam President. Madam President, I'm a practicing Catholic, Madam President, and we are in the season of Lent. And if we know what it means to be in the season of Lent, the Church observes it as one of the most important periods of the Church calendar, and I know you can relate, Madam President. And it's a period of contemplation, of fasting, of penitence, and so on, Madam President. And so I have sat here this morning, and I have listened to two members of the opposition this morning, Madam President, and I am not sure what their religious affiliations are, but I saw semblances of contemplation and penitence coming through in their presentations this morning, Madam President. And there were attempts. Madam President, I say this against the backdrop that I've heard a few things uttered this morning that although I never want to go down the route of saying, of pointing fingers, but sometimes, Madam President, when the doors are open, it gives you an opportunity to walk in and perhaps explore and seek and find, Madam President. Madam President, I note very well that Senator Polius expressed her support for the motion before us, being an educator herself, understanding the importance of such a motion, Madam President. But Madam President, when she walked into the door, where she opened up the issue of school security, albeit I too will admit that it has to be an issue, and it is an issue that is paramount to any right-thinking individual, Madam President. But to have, and I chuckled when I heard my Senate colleague, the parliamentary secretary in the Ministry of Education, use the term that Senator Polius had painted a picture of doom and gloom. I looked down at my notes, Madam President, because these were exactly the words that I had written on my notebook while Senator Polius spoke. And so I'm pretty sure that we are not both misled and misguided by what we perceived in her presentation this morning. Because if we go back a bit, Madam President, at every juncture, the Minister of Education has taken time out to explain what the processes and what the policies and what the actions of the government and the Ministry of Education has been doing as it refers to school security. Madam President, in around March of this year, the minister announced that the ministry had procured the services of a security expert to finalize a comprehensive security document to look at the security of school plants, Madam President. And so for us to widely go on that tangent, that it does not seem that we're doing the other things that will complement this piece of this motion that is presented to us this morning, is grossly inadequate and is misleading, Madam President. Madam President, on February 12, 2024, the minister went on further to indicate that the ministry have put provisions in place to give psychosocial support to our students, Madam President, and that was in the heels of the incident that occurred at one of our secondary schools on the island, Madam President, February 11th, just a few days ago. And so, in my opinion, it does not seem to speak to a government or a ministry who does not, one, recognize that there is an issue. And I heard one of the senators say that the leader of government business recognized an issue, but apparently gave no indication as to what the government is doing. But it is there. We know that the ministry, through the minister and the parliamentary secretary, have indicated that there are measures being put in place for school security. So now coming to the parliament with a motion to borrow money under the International Development Association for OECS Skills and Innovation Project is not a project in isolation to the other issues that exist within our education system, Madam President. Madam President, if I recall as well, in 2018, and if we know our history well, we know which government was at the helm at that time. There was a project called the Model Safe Schools Project that the government of St. Lucia did take part in to implement a program to advance school and safety and risk reduction. And so I am left perhaps to ask, what then were the tangible results of that project? And I'm not saying that there were not tangible results. I want to ensure that we get that clear. I am not by any means indicating that there were no tangible results, but simply to say that over the years and over time, successive governments have been putting measures in place to beef up school security, Madam President. And it is clear that any one measure is not the answer to the issue, but what we've seen is successive programs, either one that is built on or new initiatives being introduced, all with the aim to ensure that our schools are made safer for our students, our teachers, administrative and auxiliary staff of schools, Madam President. Madam President, whilst I sat across here, again, like I said, no tant kawem, Madam President, ek peut-être nous adidans ici à point, ou nous comprendre bien qui sa tant kawem yé, en tant côté ou ka reflecter, en tant côté ou ka peut-être poider plus, en tant côté ou ka set aside peut-être bagay ou aimé manger be boire so ça reflecter en les qui mounou yé kon kuité et qui manière ou ça vini pli poué source, Madam President. And so I sat here again, Madam President, and I heard the leader of the opposition ask the question in terms of universal secondary education, and he asked the question in terms of results of universal secondary education, Madam President. Madam President, maybe I am too young to know where the leader of opposition business was at the time when universal secondary school education was implemented. And certainly maybe I was too young to understand then what the importance of universal secondary education meant. But Madam President, the little that I remember is that I remember that there was a time in this country where secondary school students were on a shift system, Madam President. I remember that growing up. What it meant, Madam President, is that certain students who were on this shift system were losing important contact time with their teachers, Madam President. If you calculate a school day for a secondary school student is starts about 8:15 and ends about what 3:15, thereabout, 2:45, but it means that day was split in two. Let's multiply that by 5 days a week, Madam President. Let's multiply it by a month or term, Madam President. This is what it meant, Madam President. Avant toutes ces places, l'école secondaire ça a été à Villa, by maman cette lycée. Il y a un chay maman, c'est half a journée yo te ka faire l'école. Madam President, I'm pretty sure the leader of government business can relate to that very well, because there were students in the constituency where he lives. There were students in the schools where he probably taught who were on shift systems, Madam President, until the introduction of more schools in this country. And you ask the question, what was the result of universal secondary education in this country? Madam President, are we seeing a general aversion, Madam President? Perhaps what we know to be true, but it seems like we're confessing it today, Madam President. We are confessing today, Madam President, that we did not care much that our students were losing important contact time in schools, Madam President. This is what I perceive from this statement, Madam President. Madam President, and I hope the young people of this country are listening. I hope, Madam President, that the young people of this country are hearing what is being uttered in the seats and over the mics opposite, Madam President. That what are the results of universal secondary education, Madam President? Madam President, if we go and we look at the statistics, Madam President, in terms of secondary school graduates over the period of time, Madam President, if we look at the statistics from the government between the period 1996-97 and the academic year 97-98, a difference of about 700 students, Madam President, got an opportunity to attend secondary school. And of course, I'm not going to stand up here and say that the program was foolproof and that it was 100% perfect, Madam President. This is not what I'm trying to assert here. But Madam President, certainly, at least 700 students got a greater opportunity to go to a secondary school. And we know the reality. The reality is not that some students at grade 6 or what we knew as standard 4, it is not that they were not academically inclined or not that they could not have gone to a secondary school, Madam President. We understand so many other factors, and there are many educators around this table. Many educators around this table. And I'm pretty sure they can attest that the day that a child sits down and would have written common entrance, a one day, Madam President, that so many things could have gone wrong on that particular day. That a child who was very academically inclined could have missed the mark, Madam President. And it means that was it for them. Out of a secondary school by a mere technicality on a day, Madam President. These are the students that the universal secondary education catered for. These are the students, Madam President. And so, Madam President, this motion, what it seeks to do is to bridge a gap between what we know to be the difference between the skill sets that are required to ensure that a country and an economy can grow and what currently exists. And like has been spoken before me, we know some of the education institutions outside of the formal secondary schools that have been able to provide such technical skills that are required to drive the economy, Madam President. Institutions such as the NSDC, the NRDF, and other institutions, Madam President. And what this motion seeks to do is to ensure that we build upon these existing institutions, Madam President, and provide even more avenues for our young people to grow their skills, Madam President. Madam President, the OECS under the Polius program, very bold statement in terms of a quality education for every child. And I think this is what the thrust is about, whether it is about universal secondary education, whether it is about universal preschool education, whether we're looking at one laptop per child, whether you're looking at one university graduate per household, a quality education for every child, Madam President. And the government of the St. Lucia Labour Party understands this, Madam President. Madam President, the OECS Polius program goes on further to state that this program is to help optimize education systems so that all children can learn, including those who are marginalized by poverty, ethnicity, disability, displacement, and it puts gender at the heart of what the partnership does and how it operates, Madam President. And again, I dare say that this really is a thrust in ensuring that this happens. The OECS, Madam President, establishes a close correlation between educational attainment and economic performance of a country. So, Madam President, when we sit here and we hear the stories of things seem to be disconnected and why we're doing this and not that instead, and why we're not paying much attention to this and that, Madam President, all of what which we can refute here. The bottom line is that there is a clear understanding, Madam President, that there is an undeniable correlation between educational attainment and economic performance of a country. And if that is understood, then we understand why we are debating this motion here today, Madam President. Madam President, if we go back to the Prime Minister's address of budget address of 2023-2024, sorry, technical vocational education was one of the aspects that the Prime Minister, Honorable Philip J. Pierre, did speak to. And we are seeing it manifesting itself with the motion before us, Madam President. And so, Madam President, with these few words, I wish to make this submission, Madam President, in support of the motion. In fact, I make this submission, Madam President, as my contribution to critique rather than to criticize the motion before us, Madam President. And so I thank you for the opportunity to do this. And I do wish the education, I heard some very exciting things that the parliamentary secretary in the Ministry of Education spoke of. And I look forward to every child in this country, with specific mention to the poor, the marginalized, and the disadvantaged, Madam President, being able to take advantage of these programs that are being rolled out by the government of St. Lucia under the Education Ministry to ensure that we build a stronger, more sustainable economy. Madam President, with these few words, I thank you.
Senator Charles.
Madam President, I rise this afternoon. You can hear me? No. And let me first begin by begging of you leave to thank this honorable Parliament for giving me another opportunity to be here, to sit in on behalf of one of my colleagues. I am always very grateful.
Can I interrupt a little bit? I think I need to indicate to senators to speak up just a little bit. We have a little bit of a mic issue. If we are to increase the volume, there would be feedback. So maybe you can project the voice just a little bit better. Thank you.
Oh, I can do that very well. Thank you, Madam President. Let me start off by extending sympathies to Senator Susan Shallery on the passing of her great-grandmother. And I also want to extend sympathies, I know they may not be watching right now, but to another family in the Kako area who's a very close family friend of ours who passed away last evening. I'd like to extend sympathies, right, you can hear better, to them as well. And also go with the Parliament to extend sympathies to the entire country on the passing of Sir Lytton Thomas, and also, I call him the Great because I said in a previous comment that he was one of those that I actually did admire Senator Tom Walcott, the former chairman of the St. Lucia Labour Party. So I do extend sympathies to his family and also to the members of the St. Lucia Labour Party, and also to extend congratulations to St. Lucia and St. Lucians, our sportsmen and sportswomen, and the great achievements that we continue to achieve in sports. I also want to take this opportunity to wish every St. Lucian, I may not get that opportunity a little later, a happy independence, and I hope that the celebration and the festivities continue in the manner, albeit that I am missing, yes, but they will, I hope that they continue in the manner that they have started so far. Madam President, I rise to support, I think it's a given on this side, that we support the motion today, especially looking at why we are borrowing this money. We do have objections to borrowing money, so I will lay that on the table. But sometimes we have to understand there are certain matters that we need to take care of and we need to borrow money for. So this is one of those that I rise to support. But Madam President, just a few observations, because I really did not intend to really speak on the bill. I think it was a given, but I just want to make a few observations that many times when we come in this honorable house, we are being asked not to oppose for opposing's sake. We are being asked to be objective in how we debate the bills. But here we are, I am sitting here, and we are being criticized by members opposite. Criticisms and calling it, they say we have penance and contemplation because they hear what is coming from this side. What is this, Madam President? You are asking us to lay hands across the aisle, to agree on certain issues. We stand up and we agree on the issues. Notwithstanding, we highlight some of our concerns, and you scold us more or less to say, because we're in the Lenten season, it is penance and contemplation. It's it's uncalled for, Madam President. It's uncalled for. I think it should be appreciated that we try our best to be objective, to stand up here, and when the need arises for us to come across the aisle and support a motion in this House. And that is what we're trying to do. So if you don't want us to support the motion and come and oppose everything, we can do that, you know. We can find reason to oppose everything. But we're not going to do that. We're going to come into this House and we're going to be as objective as we can. Madam President, I also want to make another observation. Senator Prosper, in her presentation, she spoke about the documents, said that it is for single mothers, low. In fact, she was given a little bit more information about the program. And I don't know who perhaps to direct that concern to. But it dawned on me that many times, and the few times that I have been given the opportunity here, we're only given an order paper, and you're just given perhaps a motion that says for Parliament to borrow, to do this, etc. But we as senators on the opposite, I don't know if senators for the government side get, but we don't get any substantive information about the bills or the motions that is being debated so that we can come into this House and we can make a proper representation. So when I heard the honorable member speaking a little bit more in depth about the program, it occurred to me that perhaps if we are to come in here and to be a little bit more objective, we need to have a bit more information or documents. So most of the time what we do is to listen to the presentation made by the leader of government business. You take notes from what he's saying, and then you make your presentation based only on that. I'm not sure if that is, I'm just saying I am not sure. I understand that this is the process, but I'm not sure if it is substantive enough and fair enough to allow for there to be greater deliberations across the aisle, so that we don't come here and we just don't speak out of turn. But if we have sufficient information, we would be able to speak to those matters in a better manner. And perhaps, I don't know, as I said, who to share the concern to. It's a constructive criticism.
If I may, Senator, this is the process that the leader of government business or the senator who's presenting the motion or the bill will provide you that information. Prior to that, you can access the services of the library downstairs or call into Parliament, but the information presented here is the information that most of us will receive. So that is where it is, and so you have time to access library services or call on the senators prior to coming in to ask them for more information, and that's all okay.
Thank you very much, Madam President. But it was just a general observation on my part. Madam President, I want to speak to two matters or two concerns that were raised. And I think in general in St. Lucia, we need to stop perhaps burying our heads in the sand, and we need to call a spade a spade. And it does not necessarily mean that because we call a spade, if there is an issue or concern and we speak about it, it means that we are, quote unquote, more or less demoralizing our country or speaking bad of our country. And the reason I'm saying that is because I know Senator Polius tried to tie in her discussion in terms of the security being a problem at our schools. And in order to ensure that this project is successful, security was becoming or being a concern. And so it is something that needed to be addressed. And I noticed the defensive stance of the members of the government when that matter is being spoken about, substantive to think that security is not a problem. And I thought to myself, if security is not so much of a problem, why did we hire a former police commissioner to put a security system in place for the school? So it means, and it seems to suggest that we are very much aware, and the member also indicated that.
Senator Kajian Shalry.
Madam President, I stand on a point of order.
What's your point of order,
The senator is misrepresenting, especially even what I said here. I do not think the note was that. I do not think that what I said was that it is not a problem. I think it was acknowledged with the discussion that there have been things put in place. So I just want the member to not misquote what was said. It's acknowledged that it is a problem, but there are things that have been put in place.
Thank you for that intervention. Proceed, Senator.
Yes, Madam President.
Yes,
So
I think we have a second.
Yes, Madam President,
Senator.
I do not rise on a point of order, rather I rise on a point of elucidation. If Senator...
Do you wish to yield, Senator Charles?
can I have him do that?
No, it relates to what you just said about the security in schools. But it's misleading. Well, let me...
Well,
Just do it in your rebuttal.
so it's a point of order.
Well,
You
in
think
that
it's
case, Madam
misleading?
President, it is a point of order. Basically, what Senator Charles just said is that in response to Senator Polius's comments on school security, she indicated that the opposition was displaying signs of negative reaction. Madam President, Senator Polius had her presentation there was complete silence, there was no reaction. We listened, and nobody stood on a point of order. We did not comment. The senator made her full presentation. So I don't know what it is that the government side did that caused Senator Charles to be indicating that there was any negative reaction. I believe if she's referring to our facial gestures, that's a lot of intuition. But clearly, there was no reaction. The senator had a full presentation, uninterrupted, and I think to suggest that we were reacting negatively is misleading.
Thank you for the intervention, Senator. Please proceed, Senator Charles.
Thank you, Madam President. So, Madam President, the defensive stance taken by the members opposite with reference to security, because it has been brought up.
I think
He mentioned the
Senator
word negative.
intended or attempted to put your mind at ease to indicate there was no defensive stance.
Well,
I know, Senator Charles, that both Senator Shalry Toussey and Senator Pauline Prosper gave responses in terms of indicating what the government had put in place, etc. But Senator Gibeon is indicating that there was no defensive stance. So I think you should take it from there and move on with your presentation on the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam President. I think sometimes when something is said, how you feel about it emotionally and how you interpret it, it's subjective to the person interpreting it. So perhaps the subjection of how the members opposite interpret and how I interpret is certainly different. So my interpretation was the fact that based on how they spoke about the matter, my interpretation that we were very defensive of it. But I stand corrected if that is not the case. However, for me, what was concerning to me was the fact that we have a security problem in schools, Madam President. I think all of us can agree on that. And the members opposite also spoke to that. To the point that we have hired a former police commissioner, and when I heard who was the person who was hired, to my mind it felt that security at schools was such a serious issue that we had to hire somebody of that caliber to put in a security program in schools. It reminded me very well of what is happening to a certain extent in Jamaica, because I do have a daughter going to school in Jamaica, and security at schools is very serious. So when I heard who was being hired to provide that type of advice, I think we are taking it to another notch, and it seems to suggest to us that it is a serious problem. But I also want to note that I saw in a news story that the same Minister of Education who speaks to the issue of school security, I think the consultant has already presented the report to the ministry, which is what he said, but he was also lamenting on the fact that he has been asking for money from his Minister of Finance for school security and has not gotten it as yet. So that also is an issue of concern for us, Madam President, that we know it's a problem. The monies are being asked for, and perhaps if there's any representative of the Ministry of Finance to say, I am also calling and lamenting on behalf of the Honorable Minister of Education, please provide the funding and some monies to the Ministry of Education to ensure that we have proper school security in our schools. So, Madam President, I also wanted to speak a little bit, maybe to clarify a little bit, because I also think that the issues that we raised about the universal secondary school education has been misinterpreted on the other side as to it is a criticism of the universal secondary school education. I don't think anybody on that side will criticize or have a criticism to say universal secondary school education was not a good thing. I grew up, fortunately for me, I was part of the era where you had those shift system, etc., and so forth. So I know a little bit about it, and I think it has been, or it was, a good thing at the time. And so the question that the Honorable Senator asked is a valid question. And why is it that he has asked that question? Because here's what we're doing today. If universal secondary school education all on its own was just a God save for every single St. Lucia and St. Lucians, we would not be debating this motion here in Parliament today, asking for monies for skills intervention in our secondary school. So it seems to suggest to us that we understand that whilst at the time we needed more access to secondary school education, we recognize today, because here's what happened, Madam President. Studies have showed, reports have showed, and lots of children, and I'm sure the Honorable Leader of Government Business can attest to that because he was the principal of a secondary school. It's not only, you do not only want to stand up in Parliament and beat your chest and say, oh, we brought universal secondary school education to St. Lucia. Every single child went to secondary school. And most or a lot of these children graduate from secondary school. Some of them cannot read, some of them cannot do basic math, some of them cannot write a letter of application, and we want to boast that every child left secondary school. That's not what it is about, and that's not what it should be about, Madam President. It should have been about that these children can attend a secondary school, but in that same breath, the secondary school can see what the need of that particular child is, because I'm sure that many educators who are here would agree that every single child learns differently. Every single child learns at different stage. And I can give you an example. I have 4 children, Madam President. The first two boys. My first son and my second son. My first son, from very early o'clock, I recognize, and Senator Ferdinand perhaps can attest to that, he was a hands-on, troublesome guy. He liked to play with things, touch things, fix things. Very early o'clock, I saw that. My second son, pure intellectual. My first son would trick him on any street smart thing that you can think about. And he was more intellectual than the first son. There were times when my first son couldn't even put a key in a door to open a lock, and my son would just do in one go. So you understand that different skills training and different children, they learn differently. So at the end of the day, what was supposed to happen when we instituted universal secondary school education was to institute a system that also allows for children who have different capabilities, who have different learning needs, children who learn differently, that we can meet them where they are. But what we did, Madam President, we blank everybody together. We just shoot them into a secondary school, in and out, like a production line. So today I am happy, I am very pleased with this motion that we have, well, the intervention started a few years ago, and I will still lament the fact that I am very disappointed that we had the Viewfort Technical School. I will always say that. We had the Viewfort Technical School. Whatever the issues were, because people felt it was stigmatized and name calling, I think we could have done better with the Viewfort Technical School than closing it down and just creating another secondary school in that area. I think we should have tried and put a system in place that allows for the children who have the technical capabilities to go to that school. So today, we are borrowing money for skills training. The only concern that I have, and I want to ask Madam President, in fact I was asking Senator, I am not too sure how it's going to be rolled out. Is it going to be applicable to every child at the tertiary level? Is it mandatory? Is it something that they have to pay for? Is it something that is just, made available to every single child, etc., etc. Some of those, I'm hoping perhaps, I thought that the parliamentary secretary in the Ministry of Education would have given a bit more details about that in terms of the rollout, how it's going to happen, etc., but I didn't hear any of that. I'm hoping perhaps in the rebuttal the honorable member will clarify that. But I just wanted to understand how it's going to work. And I also, now that we've given the approval, and Parliament most likely will be getting the approval to borrow that money, I also want to hear a tentative date of the rollout of the program. How soon will that program be rolling out to ensure that the children, especially nowadays, Madam President, we can see what is going on and we can see what is happening with our young men and our young women right now. How soon can we roll out that program to ensure that those who need it can get access to it, and so that we can have the necessary intervention with our young people? That is all I have to say, Madam President, and thank you very much for your time.
Senator Jean.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Like my fellow senators, I wish to extend condolences to the families of former Senator Clayton Thomas, as well as former Senator and Chairman Emeritus Tom Walcott on their passing. I also wish to extend condolences to my fellow Senators Kejiana Tuse-Shalwi and Senator and Leader of Government Business Gibeon Ferdinand on the passing of their relative. I also wish to congratulate all the sportsmen and women who received awards on Saturday, especially Johnson Charles, who was the Sportsman of the Year, and of course our very own Julian Alfred as Sportswoman of the Year. And she continues to blaze our flag internationally in the recent races that she participated in. Madam President, I also wish to extend congratulations to all St. Lucians on our 45th anniversary of independence. Independence for me, Madam President, is one that I'm very proud of, and I will go further to say that I look forward to the day when we as a nation can transform ourselves into a republic so that it could show our adulthood in a big way. So happy independence to everyone. Madam President, as I sat and listened through the debate, I really want to bring us back to what we are discussing today. Because, Madam President, what I see before us is a motion to borrow $15 million for the OECS Skills and Innovation Project. Because, Madam President, I think we stray and we go all over the place. But we're really here to debate skills and innovation, instilling in our youth, in our young people, skills training, innovation training, in order for them to be more productive citizens. But as I sit and I listen to my colleagues on the other side, it reminds me of the Banana Salvation Committee. Some of the young people around may not know, but we knew the coupe par coupe, Because I am wondering whether there is support or not support. So on one hand you're hearing I support, on another hand you're hearing we criticize, we critique, we scrutinize. Est-ce que vous couper, eh bien pas couper. Est-ce que skills, eh bien pas skills. To me that is the question that I have in my mind right now, listening to my colleagues on the other side. Let's be clear. Who can be against borrowing for skills development of our young people? How could anyone be opposed to skills development? So we wrap up skills development and then we talk in security, we talk in box, we talk in St. Jude. Let's get focused. We're talking about putting skills into our young people so that they can be more productive and upstanding citizens. Madam President, you and I came from a secondary school, the Castries Comprehensive Secondary School, where throughout our tenure at that school, we were given certain skills. Every single term we were exposed to a new skill. So we learned cookery, we learned dressmaking, we learned plumbing, woodwork, machine shop, welding, tout bagay, skills, c'est ça qui li. Pas mix li, pas fait bouillon épi, Madam President. So, what the government is attempting to do is to provide improved skills for our young people at the various institutions. And so, Madam President, I reflect on the schools that we went to. I think Leader of Government Business attended that school as well, the Castries Comprehensive School, which will be celebrating its 50th anniversary not too long from now. Yeah? And Senator Jawair as well. We are grateful for that school because, Madam President, up to now I could sit down by myself and hem my clothes because of what I was taught at that school. I think I can do a little plumbing. I can saw a piece of wood. I can do certain things. I chose a different path. I chose the academic path. But I went into secretarial, again typing, that's what I learned at Castries Comprehensive School. And I came through the secretarial path to where I am today. So, Madam President, this thing of universal secondary education and its failures and so on, let's bring us back. The government of the administration of the St. Lucia Labour Party brought about universal secondary education in 2006. Yeah? At the time, the Minister of Education was Honorable Mario Michel. What happened in December of 2006? The elections came and the United Workers' Party administration formed the government and stayed there for 5 years until 2011. What did they do about universal secondary education between the period 2006 to 2011? Si il pate bon, Madam President, zoteni seklone pou zot waje. As bad as it was, there was a period of 5 years that you could have improved on that period, on that universal secondary education. Roger, 5% ou te la. You left it, and in 2024 you come in now and cry. But last dizo, Madam President, se moun na pavle tons dot hele. Yo te hele in 2020 2016 to 2020 and 21. When they were crying, you all told them, you all just start to cry. So don't come now in 2024 and cry for them. What we are doing right now, Madam President, through this OECS Skills and Innovation Project is to fix what was not done during that last period. That is what is happening there now. So you're going to see through that program, a number of young people are going to be skilled, are going to be provided with learnings that will help them to develop. Madam President, that reminds me of Sir Arthur Lewis, our very own Nobel laureate, who says that the fundamental cure for poverty is not money, but knowledge. That's what he said. And that is the principle that is being followed here through the OECS Youth Program. He also said that education is the great growth industry of the third world. So, Madam President, what I would like to see coming out of this training program is that at institutions like the South Elvis Community College, like the Cashries Comprehensive School, like the NSDC, like the Stanley John Odlum Secondary School, and some of these schools where there already exists technical and vocational education, that these schools be infused with much more of these TVET programs. So we can have programs like agriculture, we can have programs like dressmaking, hairdressing, massage therapy, and some of these what I call non-traditional skills. I think there is need to recognize that not everyone is academically inclined. And so it's important for us to look at the skills that are demanded out there and equip our young people with these skills. Madam President, I am seeing that the government is moving on a positive trajectory towards that skills development. You're seeing, and they don't like to hear it, Madam President, but you're seeing the 1 laptop per child. But going along with that 1 laptop per child, you're seeing training in digital technology for the teachers. So it's not just about a laptop. And Madam President, we seem to forget, maybe because we use laptops just for one purpose. For me, I use laptops mainly for word processing, for Excel, and the internet for research. But Madam President, most of the functions you go to right now, you're seeing the young DJs with their laptop. That's what they're using it for, to mix music and to do other things. When you see them mixing the music and you hear them bringing in Denry segment into reggae and all kinds of things, it's through the laptop. So, Madam President, the value of a laptop, Madam President, is far-reaching. And we should not view a laptop as simply a little device that, children just go to school with. There is much more that can be learned from that laptop. Madam President, I'm hearing the debate on the non-payment to UE. That is a serious matter. The University of the West Indies is an institution for the people of the West Indies. And so we should not even think about, yes, we're sending our children to the United States and so on. If we have a university that is closely located to us, we should be able to support that institution so that it becomes an avenue, or the first avenue, for our children in the region. Why are we going to be indebted to this very same institution that we need? Madam President, during that time we failed to pay UE, you know what we were paying? You know what the former government was paying? Minimum revenue guarantees, MRGs, to airlines. Because the focus was on bringing in tourism.
Madam President, arising the point of order, I really...
What is your point of order, Senator
The member
Fede?
is grossly misleading the House by suggesting that we have been paying MRGs. I happen to have been the Minister of Tourism in the former administration, and I challenge the Senator to provide any evidence that we have paid a single MRG to any aviation company in St. Lucia. That is an absolute falsehood, and the Senator needs to retract that statement. That is not true.
Senator Jean, Senator Fede has asked that you provide that information, the evidence that his administration was engaged in such payments. Are you able to do so at this time?
Madam President, I'm not able to provide the information right here, so I will track it until I can bring it for him, Madam President.
So are you going to, what is your stance at
I
this
will
point?
retract it until I can bring the evidence.
Okay, thank you.
Because I'm on my feet right now, but I will get it for him.
Thank you, Senator.
Because we know, Madam President, that Liat was neglected until now its complete demise. And so it appears that UE was going down the same road as well. But thanks to the people of St. Lucia, that on July 26, 2021, we made that aircraft change course. We got a new pilot who is now steering that aircraft in the right direction. So, Madam President, I will leave the MRGs alone for now. So, Madam President, also, while we were neglecting UE, I want us to go and find out why there were flights going to Lucerne, Switzerland, and Florida and all other places in search of schools. I want us to go and do homework to find out why there was this quest towards such places like Lucerne and Florida. These are questions that I'll just put out there for the people of St. Lucia to go and do their homework. Madam President, I want to highlight the work of some of our institutions. You see, if we have to look at universal secondary education in a vacuum, we will lose the point completely. Universal secondary education has to go along with other institutions, which I call second chance institutions, one of which is the National Skills Development Center, the NSDC. And I want to just bring to the attention of my fellow senators that the NSDC has been engaged in many skills training programs. Over the last 3 years, from 2021 to 2023, well, I would say 2 years, they have engaged in programs on agro-processing, boat operations and safety, crop production, outboard engine repairs, bartending, cookery, food and beverage service, hair design, nail art, massage therapy, housekeeping, and about 279 people have been trained at the NSDC in these areas. Madam President, if you go on the NSDC's Facebook page, you will see an announcement dated February 6, 2024 for scholarships for agro-processing and crop production for our people. you would see in January there were free makeup and hairstyling provided at the NSDC. A place where we can go and get groomed. Madam President, I also wish to bring to your attention that there is a young man, I saw it on the website, by the name of Shem Japierre, who participated in a skills training program put on by the Beaufort Foundation, and he did barbering and has now opened his new barber shop in Corinth. There is also an aquaponics facility at the NSDC in Vieux-Fort. So, Madam President, when we're looking at OECS skills, we're looking at it in a comprehensive way. This is what the government of St. Lucia has been doing. We also have to marry this youth skills training program with the Youth Economy Agency. That Youth Economy Agency has done so much, Madam President, that I keep thinking that they were open 2 years ago. An agency that opened in April of 2023 has already trained hundreds of young people, provided grants, provided advice. So, when we look at all of what is happening, Madam President, we're seeing that we have a government that is moving in the right direction. All I ask, Madam President, is that while we're looking at skills development, especially when it comes to the Sir Arthur Lewis Community College, the requirements for entry into these skills programs should not be as onerous as those for the other academic programs. Because granted, some of our young people may not have all of the academics in order for them to get in. So the strong requirements of 6, 7, 8 CXCs for entry should be reviewed in order to take in some of these students who are more technically inclined than those that are academics. I also ask, Madam President, that we look at all of the institutions, like I said, the Castries Comprehensive School, the Leo Hess Comprehensive School, Stanley John Odlum Secondary School, the Vieux-Fort Technical Vocational School or the Post-Secondary School, NSDC, CARE Institution, and the others. Madam President, lastly, I want to say that there is a new event that takes place, I think in October of every year, in observance of Teachers Week, where there is roll call. That's when we're asked to put on our uniform, the uniform of our alma mater, of our high school. And Madam President, while I believe this activity was just maybe a fun activity, it for me has brought out a different perspective. What I see, Madam President, especially in the public service and in some of the large private sector institutions, is a showcase of some of these schools that we would have abandoned. And we're seeing people in high office wearing these uniforms. So while universal secondary education may be denounced as if it was no good, we're seeing people who came from these very same institutions that were created to alleviate the shift system and to bring about universal secondary education. You've seen people donning the uniforms of their high schools, which is so good. And they're in the public service, they're at hotels, they're at major manufacturing institutions, and they're in the banking sector and so many other places. So, Madam President, my advice to those who believe that universal secondary education was a failure is fix it. Let's do what is necessary for the young people of our society, to give them the skills that are necessary for them to be upstanding citizens of our beautiful country. We cannot be here talking independence and celebrating independence while denouncing universal secondary education as if there are children who are down to for gloom and doom. The other thing too, in trying to deal with the crime situation, we must seek to give the young people the skills, the tools that are necessary to deflect them from idleness. Don't marry the two. Let's work on preventing what is happening by giving our children the skills. So on this OECS skills and innovation project, I said lastly, but Madam President, one other thing. Last week I saw right there in the Parliament yard this Kaboué competition. Again, something that we see as a fun activity, but I see it as another means of enhancing skills of our children and making them innovative. A lot of these children who were there don't know about Kaboué. Some of us here knew about Kaboué. I'm not sure, Senator Jawa, you know about Kaboué. Right? But Madam President, by bringing in that Kaboué, building the Kaboué, putting in motorized equipment and so on in that Kaboué, Madam President, is a way of pulling out the creativity and the innovation from our young people. These are things that they need, Madam President, to make them productive. So let's not pull down the initiatives that are being done by this government. In closing, Madam President, I want to remind us that this government, under the leadership of Honorable Philip J. Pierre, took a debt to GDP ratio in 2021, and I want to refer to page 50 of the Economic and Social Review of 2022, which says, and I quote, after rising by 10.4%, and 9.6% in 2020 and 2021 respectively, the official stock of public debt increased at a slower pace of 6.3%. And it went on to say, Madam President, which this led to public debt to GDP ratio falling from 85.9% at the end of December 2021 to 69.8% at the end of December 2022. We must never forget that. So to associate what we're doing here with the maripoté that we saw from 2016 to 2021, that cannot be equated. There is prudent borrowing here. There is borrowing targeted at improvements in our national development. And so we must never lose sight of it when we're going to come and hear about Madi Pwete. The Madi Pwete has gone. It has ended. Nuka Pwete kubai pujoset lisi vini plineye. That is why we are here. Don't equate the two. Let us not let the people of St. Lucia believe that tout borrowing c'est borrowing. Borrowing qui take a fait avant, take a escalate out of the roof. It take a pete pack. Right now, the borrowing that we are doing is sustainable, prudent borrowing, and the figures speak for themselves. I thank you, Madam President.
Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Madam President, and I thank my colleagues who have contributed to this motion for many reasons. I think what it did is that it provided an opportunity for us to reflect on some of the things that are necessary, and I think to some extent Senator Polius raised quite a few of them, and I think for the better part of a presentation that was done, as well as providing my colleague senators on the government side to provide further evidence of the justification for this first motion. Madam President, I would like to just respond briefly to some of the issues that were raised. Some of them will overlap. I tend to want to address one at a time in terms of the senators who present, but some of them overlap, so I will attempt to just be brief and try to condense some of them. Madam President, first of all, I want to begin, or my departure point, from the response coming from the leader of opposition business. I think sometimes leaders set the tone, although he didn't speak first, but and fortunately today all of the opposition is represented while I rebut. That doesn't happen very often. So let me profit the opportunity while the leader is still here to respond firstly to his departure point. And his first statement, Madam President, was that he was referring to the opposition as being shameless. And he attempted to correct himself. But I wanted to say, I thought he was absolutely on point when he started. His very first statement was probably the most accurate statement he made today, that the opposition is shameless. And so while he obviously corrected himself, I want to reiterate that they were, or they are, because, you see, Madam President, it takes me to another point that everybody here has discussed. Borrowing for paying for or honoring our obligations to UE. Instead of the government that he served in find the need to find money or borrow money to service the debt that we owed to UE. And I also must add, Madam President, Monroe College. We may have forgotten Monroe College. So in addition to the 22 million that the leader of opposition business cited, it is a little more now. We also have a debt, or inherited a debt, of over $400,000 to Monroe College, a college that is locally based, that is providing critical tertiary educational support for what we already have. And that this government then boasted about having this partnership with Monroe College and all of these call centers and hospitality training that we heard so many millions borrowed for. So, Madam President, instead of finding money to pay to UE and Monroe College, we are not coming here to borrow money, Madam President, to pay range for 30 million. We're not coming here to do that. Madam President, we are coming here to borrow money to pay UE. And we are not coming here, Madam President, to borrow 30 million for Lockerbie to put out, what, artificial turf? We are not coming here, Madam President, to borrow 7 million for vaccines that we did not get. We are not here to do that, Madam President. This OECS Skills initiative is not borrowing money to retrofit any building for any so-called investor, to pay salaries for his staff. We're not doing that, Madam President. We are not coming here, Madam President, to cancel a PPP, to borrow 400 million US dollars or so, and you can convert it to get almost $1 billion, to build an airport so that somebody can get a direct award. Madam President, this is not what we're doing here. This 11.5 million, and of course remember Grenada is part of this, so in total 15 million. Madam President, this is money, and I think Senator Polius was accurate in standing to say she supports it because she recognizes that it is to an investment in the youth of this country, in the education of this country. That is what we are here to do. So when the leader of opposition business started by saying that the opposition is shameless, I think that encapsulates his entire presentation. He could have just said that and have his seat. So, Madam President, one of the issues that was raised by almost every speaker to this morning or this afternoon is the issue of the universal secondary education. Now, when I was going through the motion, I had not anticipated such an extensive discussion about an initiative that we accept had its issues, absolutely. But I want to remind this Senate that this initiative was introduced correctly, as Senator Jean said, in 2006. And between 2006 and 2021, the government that presided for 2 terms over USC was this government, or the government that they serve in, the United Workers' Party, presided between 2006 to 2021. And again between 2006 to 2011, and again 2016 to 2021 for two complete terms of office, interrupted by the Labour Party for 1 term. This is the government that presided over the universal secondary education concept. So how do you come here today, spend half of your presentation beating up on an initiative that I accept? I was a teacher then, and we had issues with that initiative. And perhaps the reason why it never took off the way it was meant to, or the way it was supposed to have taken off, was because for the first part of the implementation, it was it was they who presided over it. Perhaps not in the personnel that is here. And another opportunity between 2016 and 2021 for more than 5 years. So I don't think that this opposition has any grounds to beat up on an initiative that we accept is not perfect, but to try to ascribe all the responsibility to those of us sitting here or the government of the St. Lucia Labour Party, I think it is unfair. Madam President, there was also quite a lot of discussion on the issue of the public service not being able to absorb our university, our graduates from secondary school. It's a fact. And in the process, the leader of opposition business attempted to suggest that we did not provide any alternative or any solutions. But I don't know why whether he wasn't listening when I made my presentation. And having mentioned that the public service cannot absorb everybody, I did indicate right away and right then that the private sector is what we need to stimulate and support to be able to provide opportunities for those people. I said that, so I'll repeat. And I also made reference to 2 initiatives that this government has undertaken through the private sector or in partnership with the private sector. One, the small, medium and micro business enterprise, SMME, that we have put $10 million into to support the private sector and small businesses to be able to absorb what the public service cannot absorb. That was clear in my presentation, but he chose not to remember that. And I also cited, Madam President, the youth economy, which is, again, an initiative that will absorb some of those people who are not able to get into the private sector, particularly young people between the ages of, let's say, under 35, to set up their own business, to be able to be owners, not just people who work for people who own a business, who can grow their own wealth, to become their own millionaires in this country, thereby reducing the pressure on everybody looking to the public service to what we call get a job. We are looking at job creation, not finding jobs in businesses or in the private sector, in the public sector. So, Madam President, I thought I should, just in case the opposition did not pick it up, that I repeat. And I also use two examples to illustrate. Madam President, I have seen a repeated attempt by the opposition to almost ridicule the laptop program. Every time we mention that program in this House or in the Senate, the opposition treats it almost, as if it's an irritant. I understand why. But it's not our fault that the former Minister for Education, who should have known better, described it in the way she did. They brought it upon themselves. So I understand why every time the word laptop is mentioned, that the opposition responds that way. You see, this government and the members here, both upper and lower house, will continue to repeat the laptop program for as long as we have an opportunity. Because this program is one that empowers people, it empowers children, it puts tools in their hands to be able to learn independently. And we are increasing that effort by providing the internet access that can make it even more effective. So you just start hearing about laptop program. We'll continue to repeat it. And I urge all the members in the Senate to continue to remind St. Lucians of the importance of this program. Now, as an educator, I will not propose that the solution or the panacea for all of our issues in terms of learning is a laptop program. Of course not. You have to have other support services and other tools and other initiatives. But do not discount the importance of the program. Madam President, Senator Polius, who I thought made a very interesting contribution this morning, used certain terms that I thought sort of captured very critical issues about this bill or this motion. She used terms commendable. She used the terms transversal or soft skills, critical thinking, collaborative, conflict resolution skills, emotional intelligence. I thought that these are all issues that are very critical in what education or the current educational environment requires. And so I believe that it was reflective of recognizing why we need to find the resources to continue to develop those. So while that was very interesting and very commendable, I cannot understand how her colleagues can then come back, almost regressing from a few progressive statements that had been made before. And she was the first speaker. So it looks like every time somebody, from the opposition sees some light and makes a reasonable or a logical or, a sensible contribution or comment, that somebody else must find reason to derail it, because it's not in the DNA to accept that, listen, this thing is necessary. We have pointed out how it can work, so let us give support to what it can do. Madam President, school safety was another issue that was raised by more than one speaker here. And I believe we all accept that our schools can be safer. I remembered being in a school where I had issues with the fence, and I had quite a few back and forth with the ministry, because I wanted the students and staff at the school to feel a lot safer. And it was refreshing to hear that Senator Charles responded, answered the question that was being asked about school safety, because she indicated that she's aware that the ministry had engaged the services of a skilled person in security to be able to come up with a proposal or some kind of paper to address the problem. So while the opposition is trying to suggest that, hey, we have issues in our schools and people are afraid and we're not doing anything, their very own, I think, most outspoken member of this opposition side actually referred to what the government has done, among other things. So I want to thank Senator Charles for bringing that issue to the table. Now, I don't think she brought it to the table to tell us that we're doing a good thing. She was bringing it to the table based on the context. She said that if it was, we had to hire somebody with high-level security expert, it tells us. But the point is, we recognize the issue. This, I have already said, when I stand on my feet, Madam President, I am not here to make it seem as if we know everything. This government is not afraid of dealing with the issues. We confront them head on. We will accept that there are gray areas, there are gaps in what we do, and when there are opportunities to fix it, we will. So I'm not going to run away from the fact that there are things that we need to deal with, particularly with school safety and security. You have heard the minister meeting with the unions and the principals associations, sitting and having dialogue about how we can improve our school security. And I have no issues accepting that we do. We have to. We're not going to deny that. But when there are strides being made to address a problem, don't come and sit in this Senate and make it appear that nothing has been done and we have no response. That is not the case, Madam President. So I want to thank Senator Charles for correcting that. Madam President, while it was not totally relevant to the debate, Senator Polius touched on it, and I thought somebody must have pulled a back on the issue of health care. I think at some point in the presentation, speaking about how do you expect students to be able to perform well, I don't want to misquote her. Okay, she used an example, right, I wrote it down. She used an example where a student had to be missing classes in order to be able to provide support for her parent overseas, right? Now, obviously, that's a dilemma that any child would have to face. Madam President, I appreciate that observation, where a young child in a college or in a school has to choose whether they have to miss class or give their parents support for seeking medical care. Madam President, how do you attribute that particular issue to what is before us? I will tell the opposition that if they had managed the healthcare services better, we would have had a better situation for that particular child. We would have had a better situation. And also, the amount of money that we owe to the institution, the Martinique Lamena, is it? That hospital. Right now, they're having difficulty accepting our patients because, again, just like with UWI, the previous government was not honoring its commitment to pay for these services. So it is that child would have been forced, the parent would have been forced to find the euros to go and pay for the service and put that student under pressure. So what we are dealing with, Madam President, a lot of it is collateral damage that was caused before we inherited the office of governance. So, Madam President, a lot of these points were very real, but every time you try to point a finger at somebody for the blame, you have to reflect on why is the situation that way? Why is it that we're still talking about a box and a hospital? Why? Why we want to bring that conversation into a debate that deals with skills training for students? Madam President, it is because we put ourselves in that predicament. The $100 million, you know what it could have done? So I don't want to digress too much and go back into it. So, Madam President, let me wrap up. I think, Madam President, that to some extent, while the physical school space or the physical infrastructural issues may require a lot more attention, and I think we were here recently to borrow some money to address school physical plants. It is important that we also pay attention to the actual instructional side. And I want to remind the opposition that contrary to what may have been said, we continue to put the issue of civics education, citizenship education, which is critical towards the total and holistic development of the child, at the forefront of our instructional process. I also want to remind the opposition that the issue of the child's soft skills and the child's coping skills, which Senator Polius raised, are being addressed. Perhaps we can put a lot more effort into it. We had an issue with a single attendance officer for the whole island, right, who has since retired, and that is an issue that we have brought to the table, because sometimes it is because children are not at school and are engaged in everything else but school that deviance creeps in, no supervision, and it eventually evolves into criminal activity and other undesirable behaviors. So, Madam President, I'll be the first to say that some of these things have to be addressed, and they are actually before us now. And so I want to give the opposition and St. Lucia the assurance that when we come here, particularly in this motion, we are simply saying, listen, as a region, the OECS sees it fit to engage in this program where two countries, Grenada and St. Lucia, have decided that they are going to borrow some money from that facility to improve their skills and competencies of the young people in their country. And every cent of this money, Madam President, will be well invested to ensure that our youth population, which is our labor force in the making, is going to be more adequately tooled, more adequately resourced, so that they can function more efficiently and effectively in the working environment. Whether it is in the public service, that they get a job, whether it is that they are going to start up their own business through the youth economy and other initiatives, say, do, and so on, or whether it is that they can find ways to even export their labor. Because right now, there is a market, Canada and other places, that is seriously looking at importing labor, importing intelligences, importing resources. And that too is another opportunity that we can use to be able to improve our GDP. So, Madam President, I hope that these few remarks have helped to clarify some of the issues that were raised. And I look forward to that money finding its way into the various agencies that will implement and bring forth a lot more productivity and a lot more efficiency in the skills and competencies of our young people. I thank you, Madam President.
Senators, the question is that Parliament authorizes the Minister for Finance to borrow an amount of $11,500,000 special drawing rights, in this resolution referred to as the credit, the loan, from the International Development Association to finance the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States Skills and Innovation Project. Be it further resolved that A, the maximum commitment charge rate payable is 0.5% per annum on the unwithdrawn balance. B, a service charge is payable at a rate of 0.75% per annum on the withdrawn credit balance. C, principal amount of the credit is repayable on the first day of April and the first day of October in each year. And D, the principal amount of the credit is repayable over a period of 40 years with a grace period of 10 years. I now put the question. As many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. As many as of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I move that the Senate stands suspended until 3:45 for a lunch break.
Senators, the question is that this sitting of Senate be suspended until 3:45 p.m. I now put the question. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. As many of our contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Sitting suspended.
The end of the first session of today's Senate meeting here, and the motion that was before the Senate was for the Finance Minister to borrow an amount of $11.5 million US, just a little more than about 15,000 EC for the equipping of young people to upgrade their skills. We had an interruption earlier due to some technical difficulties, and once that was sorted out, the debate continued in the House. Concerning this loan that the members just debated on, as I mentioned, it is the amount of $11,500,000 to equip young people to upgrade their skills, give them the necessary skills, the required skills for the job market. As was mentioned in the debate, this motion was critical because the COVID pandemic had exposed a problem of the lack of skills that some of the young people, particularly in the hotel industry, had lacked. And so that loan will be payable over a 40-year period with a grace period of 10 years, and will be payable at a rate of 0.5%. There were interesting discussions as usual with the Senate, and all in all, I must say members of the opposition, although they raised certain queries concerning the loan, they did in effect support the motion to borrow money for the equipping of the young people to provide them with the necessary and requisite skills that the job market requires. So the House at this moment stands adjourned, and we will resume again at 3:45. Please join us back at 3:45 for a continuation of the Senate hearing, where 2 other motions and a bill is slated to be discussed. For Virgil Leonti, thank you so much for watching.